Writing as a way to understand depression.
Mabel Dodge Lujan left an indelible mark in Taos, and in leaving memoirs, she shares her inner life and struggles with depression. What did it take for her to move forward?
She had to explore throughout her life every conceivable cure, and there really were no cures for bipolar disorder, but manic depression, as it was called in her day. And she finally ended up working with a variety of psychiatrists, but the most important one was the most important Freudian analyst in the United States, A.A. Brill. And he was perhaps one of the most important mentors in her life. He was really a close friend and mentor as well as an analyst, somebody who was, aside from his orthodoxy and Freudianism, very pragmatic. He believed that people had to get a job. They had to work. They had to do something meaningful with their life. And so when Mabel met him in a state of despair, actually before she met him, she wrote him in the summer of 1916 and said, "If I don't see you, I won't make it to the fall." And he wrote back and said, "Yes, you will. I'm busy."
It must have taken a lot.
It was really
It must have taken a lot of courage for her to take those steps.
She was always very forthright. She never necessarily followed any regimen that her doctors told her, her psychiatrists. But Brill really knew how to deal with a woman who had intense cycles of absolute manic ecstasy, visionary moments, kind of explosive beliefs that she could change the entire world, which was part of her for most of her adult life, and then would fall into the worst kinds of agonizing, helpless, feeling like she was at the end of the world depressions. And he realized that one of the things she had to do was do something she could do, and she could write. And so from the first time he ever met her, when he'd actually heard her at her salon reading a story she'd written about her third husband, which was very powerful, he said, "You have to write."
So that's how she came to writing?
That is how she came to writing. When she would go in and out of despair, he would say to her, "Write, you have got to write your memoirs." I think it was what saved her life. I don't think she would have made it through manic depression. I don't think she would have made it through her life if she had not been able to create an autobiographical self that could make sense of the unbelievably complex and challenging and difficult and transformative changes over her life that she had. And so writing was catharsis. She was doing what we now call writing therapy, but actually that was part of Freud's theory, that when you talk, you can work out and pay attention to and discover and understand what it is that's driving you crazy. Unfortunately, manic depression cannot be cured solely by psychotherapy or psychoanalysis. They didn't know that then. But Freud and Brill were mentalists. They did not believe taking pills or whatever was going to make a difference. It was insight that cured. It was talking that cured. It was writing that cured.
What was expected of women at this point in history?
Well, most women were expected to be exactly what A.A. Brill said women should be, wives and mothers guarding the sexual interests of the race. He knew her at the time when she was running a salon in New York, and she was involved in modern art and in radical politics, and he knew he wasn't going to ever move her into the home where she would be sheltered and quiet.
Did she manage to forge her own life?
She did forge her own life in most ways. She always believed she needed a man to prove herself and had to get jump-started by a man encouraging her. And yet she jump-started everything. She even said, "I wouldn't have written if Brill hadn't encouraged me to do so." But her memoirs certainly show that if she hadn't had the experience and the wherewithal to be able to write about it and reconstruct it and be honest and open and telling her story in ways that were often unbelievably unflattering to her. It wasn't Brill who did that, it was she who did that. She forged her own life, and she also forged her own therapy. If she didn't like what her psychiatrist told her, she told them she didn't.
Do you think that she also wanted to write these to help women or help society?
Absolutely, she said so. So she started off writing as a personal form of therapy to try to understand herself and who she was. And it's interesting because she and Brill corresponded over 20 years. They wrote an incredible number of letters to each other. Even when she was living in Taos, he couldn't do therapy with her, but he did therapy by letter, and she would come back and work with him in New York when she was really desperate. And he said, do this, this will help you. And he was absolutely right. But at some point after she started writing, and she wrote this in the introduction to one of her memoirs, and to a friend she said, why should those of us who suffered, who are malformed, who are grotesque, who lived under a social structure that denied us any form of nourishment or goodness, why should we go on living like this if we can be honest and open about who we are so that those who come after us can have the peace and freedom to create a different life?
So really, we don't get a full picture of her without
You
exploring
absolutely cannot. And as a young person who had absolutely no complaints about my body or soul or mind, I didn't care that she was manic depressive, even though she announced it in her third memoir. And then as an old person who's been through some things in my life, I said, how could I not have realized how important this was as a factor, not the factor, but also I wasn't allowed to read the psychiatric papers and the letters until the year 2000. So I did not really have a full appreciation of what she was going through and what she suffered.
So at the end of the day, what is the most important part of this aspect of
I think the
Mabel
most
Dutch
important
Luhrmann?
part is the fact that she shared it honestly and openly, that she was in no way unwilling to have people understand that she could be a monster, and that if she had not written this work and shared it with the world, I don't know, that history wouldn't be known. And the people who still suffer through this and are ashamed by even announcing it would not be able to, can learn from her how fantastic it is to be able to be honest about this disease and not hide it, because it doesn't work. You can't hide it.
Well, Lois Rudnick, thank you so much for talking with us.
A pleasure. Thank you.